Testing. Testing. 1 2 1 2.
Let's do this. This is a podcast from the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum.
Hello, I'm Ger Rowe from the Drug Education Project at Bray Youth Service, working on behalf of the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum. In this, the 5th episode of our podcast series, we will be taking a look at the Bray Community Addiction Team, or BCAT, the town's support service for individuals, families and the wider community affected by substance misuse and addiction issues. Danielle O'Brien and I spoke to Riadhna Holahan, the supervisor practitioner at BCAT's Under-18s support service.
So I'm Riadhna. I work in Bray Community Addiction Team, also known as BCAT. So BCAT is a service, community-owned service in Bray for anyone affected by their own drug and alcohol use or drug and alcohol use within the family and related issues. BCAT's been around since 2002, but I specifically work with 12 to 25-year-olds, so the youth, the under-18 service, and then, because we consider youth up to 25-year-olds. We've been working with the younger people since 2016, was when we kind of launched the service. Stakeholders in the community had kind of highlighted that while we could case by case take on 16-year-olds and up, because they are entitled to their own treatment and stuff legally and things like that, the under 16s was a huge gap. So services like Crosscare, services like Connect, the different youth services and Lucina and schools and other services were kind of crying out for a service for the under 16s. So we've been providing it since 2016, and sure enough, it's lived up to the gap that was there. Do you know what I mean? We've been quite busy. But I suppose what's unique about BCAT is it serves, services from harm reduction services and the drop-in and things like that, which most people in Bray know of. We also provide a whole family support service, and now we're under 18s as well, and then one-to-one services for adults and various groups, different kind of support groups around drug and alcohol use as well.
Riadhna explained how BCAT has a particular support model that they use.
Our main model that we'd use is called the Adolescent Community Reinforcement Approach, ACRA for short. Basically, it's working with the young person where they're at, and also there is scope for bringing caregivers in afterwards, and that really proves to be beneficial, because if a young person is coming into me and working around communication skills and relationship building and emotional management, and of course reducing their use, or hopefully, if it is their goal, to be drug free, it's very difficult for them to be changing dynamics at home alone. So we would, if it's all up to the young person, but if they're willing, we would get a caregiver involved. Sometimes that's not possible, depending on a home situation. It might be a teacher, it might be a youth worker, one of you guys. It might be any kind of able adult. It could be a cousin, it could be an older sibling, someone to support the young person in their efforts. And there's lots of questions young people have, and I know this is aimed at young people, around confidentiality, and parents would kind of ask that as well, like, how does it work that the young person comes into us, talks about drug use, and then what we have to ask the parents is kind of that they'd almost be handing the young person over to us, trust that we would risk assess. And what that means is that we don't tell, say mum, for example, in an ideal situation, but we don't know mum or dad, but a caregiver, we don't tell the caregiver everything, but the young person understands from day one, when we go through confidentiality, that if risk is greater, the parent is, or the caregiver, auntie, whoever, is informed. But that's a very supportive piece. Really, it's an open space for that young person to talk freely, that they have their own worker, and that's why we really encourage a family member or a caregiver to engage in our family support service as well. We have three family support workers who work exclusively with that family member. We do groups, we bring the family together sometimes. It's all tailored to the young person.
Dealing with the day-to-day issues of alcohol and drug misuse is the main reason why BCAT exists.
So alcohol and drugs are kind of, or the scale of problematic alcohol and drug use and its related issues in Bray is why our service exists. Is why our service is quite a large service, is why DAISH exists, is why, that we have a separate travelling community service in Bray. And we would work very closely with DAISH. It is why we are here, but it shows, I think, the amount of services relating to drug and alcohol issues in Bray shows the scale of how drug and alcohol can kind of affect our community. Do you know what I mean? Or any community. But yeah, so it's basically why BCAT exists, why our under 18 service exists, why any of the services do exist.
Like every other support agency in the town, the COVID crisis has had a big effect on BCAT's service operations.
Yeah, so in relation to COVID-19 in the past few months, I suppose I'll do service provision first and then go on to the service users and what we know. But service provision, it's altered it entirely, as I'm sure you guys, everybody, all services in the community are experiencing. We chop and change constantly. We're keeping up with public health advice and the HSE's advice. We would be funded through the HSE through the task force as well. So we have direct lines and stuff to try and keep up to date, and to try, what we're trying to do is basically provide as much of each service within our umbrella as we can. So as soon as we can, we have people coming in face to face again for their one-to-ones. As soon as we can, we have bigger numbers coming into the drop-in. I suppose the drop-in is a really good example. So we have a low threshold open access drop-in. What that means is anybody at all can access our drop-in. And I suppose in the beginning, in the last lockdown, we had to shut down entirely, and we were only doing handouts at the door. We were doing kind of crisis intervention inside, but mostly the guys were coming up to the door and we could have a little chat and things, but it was all very much through the door, which is very strange for that kind of contact work and what we're used to providing and what our service users would be used to receiving. So it was really, really difficult.
One aspect of working through the COVID pandemic situation has revealed to Riadhna the fact that BCAT service users may be even more socially isolated than most people would initially think.
One thing our manager Elaine said to us at the beginning, we were nervous going into work. Nobody knew what this thing was. And we were obviously thinking of our own well-being and our family's well-being as well as the service users. And Elaine said to us, sorry, I might even get emotional saying this. Elaine said to us, we are more likely to give it to the service users of the drop-in than they are to us, okay? And she said this, and, you know, some people, you know, we really kind of sat there and thought about it, and we kind of thought, you know, no, you know, surely it's even or whatever. Any human can give it to anyone. No one has been, not one of our service users of our most isolated and marginalised groups have been diagnosed with COVID-19 yet. And I think that can show how isolated these groups are from the community, and Elaine was spot on. You know, some of us have had household members and things, and we've all been isolating, so that's another impact, I suppose, on the service, and trying to keep it going, but having staff short staff numbers as well because of underlying needs and all of that. But I think that was one of the biggest findings for us, was that, you know, how long are we into it now and how many cases, and not one of our more marginalised service users have tested positive anyway, or have had those symptoms. So that was a huge, I think that's very telling of how these service users cope in day-to-day, service users, these people cope in day-to-day life, and how little interaction maybe they are having with other people, because I'm yet to hear of even someone in their own maybe circles. And they're maintaining all protocol. They sanitise, they do everything that they're supposed to do, like all of us. But I found that quite harrowing to realise, you know, even in what we do, just to really, it really sets it home as well. And I don't mean that insultingly to any of them. I think they follow protocol like all of us. But I think it's just something for us all to remember in our community, when this, or if this is ever managed and over, that we remember how much we maybe walk by people and don't interact with people.
The restrictions imposed by observing COVID rules have also made it more difficult for BCAT workers to stay in contact with people who need their service.
COVID's been a weird one in that sometimes it's been, so when I talk about young people and those hard to reach young people, it's been harder to reach a lot of them unless they were engaged already. And like I said, even some of mine, I'll just talk about my own client caseload. Maybe some of them are listening. Some of them have kind of dripped off this time round, whereas they would have been in great contact in the first time. But a lot of the harder to reach young people were even harder to reach. So that was hard to know. We were getting reports back. There was a lot about nitrous oxide. We did a piece with Paul from Connect around nitrous oxide as well, if people want to look at that as well. So we were hearing all these huge reports, yet the guys who were kind of engaging with us were a bit older, and they were saying they weren't using it, and it was hard to access those young people. So it was hard to know what else they were using, and my concern was we would have known of a lot of these groups of young people and that they were already using things like cocaine and MDMA and stuff like that. So when they're harder to reach, it's hard for us to know where it's at. And my concern is just not so much their drug use increasing, but the amount of drugs they're taking at once increasing. And if they're not engaging with services and getting that information from the likes of yourselves or from us, or even, of course, in their youth services and stuff where they have access to people who can give them a bit more information, and that would be very worrying. But absolutely, in our statistics, it would show alcohol has really, really increased. Cocaine dropped for a little while through the first... not dropped as in plummeted, but it reduced. It was on its way up big time, and we were saying, you know, the horrible saying of the boom is back the last couple of years, and then it kind of reduced, but that was access, and this is in general across our adults and young people. It had reduced, and then as restrictions eased again, it skyrocketed again, and now it's still up there. But it definitely increases as people are more isolated, as people are, and because when the younger people weren't in school, that obviously provided ample opportunity for things to increase. But definitely in general seeing an increase in the adult service users who will be in touch with us a lot. Crack has been it was starting to increase, but it's absolutely rampant again now. Alcohol, cocaine, weed, and then as well prescription drugs as well, and I know you're going to ask me about them in a while, but they've increased as well, and access to them, and people experiencing symptoms of anxiety but then messing around with them, and that has all increased too.
In undertaking her day-to-day work at BCAT, Riadhna is very much aware of the wider adverse effect on family life arising from a member's substance misuse.
Yeah, so with regards to how drug and alcohol use and dependency affects family life, I would always call the issues we deal with a family problem. I know that in BCAT we see substance use as symptomatic of something else that's going on for that person, and other things, and they're all interacting with each other, but often drug use can be a very visible symptom as to hurt and trauma and other things that people are trying to deal with. So usually those things can involve family, but also the path to recovery is going to involve family as well. So unfortunately, with drugs and alcohol use, as we're all aware, the related issues and the stuff becomes a problem at home. So if I'm talking about with young people, we would deal with a lot of aggression, intimidation, violence and things within the home, relationship breakdown. This can come from either side as well, by the way, from parents to children and back and forth, and siblings and everything. It can become quite a chaotic scene for people. So that's why we say it is so important for a family member to get their own family support worker. And the reason we try and encourage them to do that within BCAT is because obviously we can all come together, but as well they use an approach called CRAFT, Community Reinforcement and Family Training. So that would teach the same kind of skills. It would look at different things the exact same way, use similar tools, teach people, provide people with tools. This very similarly to how I'd work with a young person. We also offer CRAFT and family support to caregivers, friends, family, girlfriends, daughters, anyone of adult, anyone who's using any kind of family member or someone they love, they're any concerned significant other of someone who is using drugs. But what you call it, we see that for people, be it an adult or a young person, but particularly with young people, I'd say, when there is someone involved in CRAFT and working with a family support worker, their outcomes are much more positive. I don't have any stats for you, Danielle, with that, but it does show it really, really helps. Like I said before, the ACRA, the way I work with young people, has scope for bringing in a caregiver if that is safe for the young person to do, and if the young person is up for it. I don't make them do anything, but that in itself has huge benefits for their outcomes. But when that family member is with, or someone, a teacher, a key worker, if it's residential care they're in, whatever it is, a social worker sometimes, someone close, a youth worker, someone close to that young person, if it can't be a family member, If they're engaging with a family support worker and getting those skills themselves, or engaging on more therapeutic level, if it is a family member and all of that hurt and trauma is going on for them as well, if they're engaging and getting those practical skills from their family support worker, it really, really benefits the drug using client. But as well, obviously, we would, refer family members for counselling and things and stuff as well. We aren't a counselling service. So we would try and signpost family members as well. I do want to clarify as well, we don't do family support for under 18s. We would refer to the ISPCC for that. So while we pride ourselves on having all these services, that's one thing that the ISPCC do. Just for little siblings and things like that, it's more appropriate for them to go elsewhere. But it's absolutely a family recovery rather than issue, I want to say, and it really shows that when everyone is working on bits, how well the recovery can go for them.
Like most of the local support services that we have spoken to in this podcast series, BCAT also recognises drug-related intimidation as a concerning factor for their clients.
So drug intimidation has now come hand in hand with most of the cases we work with, be it adults, young people, family members, and drop-in users, all of our service users. It's huge, the way some of our older clients and stuff who would have been on the scene a long time ago as well. Everyone's a dealer now. I know when we were all younger, you went to certain people, whereas now everybody's a dealer. So part of this drug intimidation that I would deal with daily is called successional intimidation, where a young person has racked up huge amounts of debt, and I'm talking, it could be anywhere from 400 to 10 grand to 15 grand would be what we'd be dealing with. And so the young person gets recruited. So that's what's called successional intimidation. They're recruited, they're asked to do jobs, be it dealing, be it smashing in windows, be it throwing petrol over things, whatever the awful things they're asked to do to pay off debts becomes part of it. The debts often usually pass to family as well if it reaches a certain level. So it's, again, that family involvement, that family problem, and it can be absolutely terrifying for both client, that the drug using client, and also family. Like I said before, these issues see no threshold. It's families from all over. We're finding that dealers that, say I rack up a debt of 500 quid and I don't start paying that off very quickly, they'll turn around to me and say, you owe me, 1,000. They could double it. They're picking figures out of their head, and people are being coerced into doing things that they wouldn't usually do. I've worked with a lot of young people who have had to do things, or who have chosen, but under coercion, to do things to try and pay off debts, and they're just in over their heads. We would try and refer to the Garda intimidation or the drugs intimidation officer. Many families don't do this, or if they do it confidentially, even of us, which I can totally appreciate, but it is a totally confidential, separate service to the general Gardaí down there. And I know that they work very tentatively and, family-centredly with the family. But I do wish more would, but I understand why they don't. So a lot of what we do as well sometimes, because we're that harm reduction kind of person-centred ethos, we would work around payment plans with families. We would explain as well, which is going to sound really harsh, but say Riadhna is 15 years old and I rack up a €500 coke debt or weed debt, and my mum just pays it off. They will come back if they know it's that easy to come from. Also, let's say it's hash or weed, and I'm not really seeing any serious mental health problems yet. I'm not really seeing, any physical deterioration. So I don't see what is wrong with me smoking this weed. I don't know what that Riadhna one's on about in BCAT. I don't know what Jer's saying down on Crosscar. There's nothing wrong with my weed use. But I rack up this debt, 500 quid. There's a consequence for a young person, is you're in trouble. With your dealers, you're in trouble, right? So it can be quite difficult. Parents get caught in this catch-20, what's that saying? 22? In a catch-22 situation of, do I allow them physically hurt my child, or do I pay them off? So families are having to deal with horrendous decisions, and we work around negative consequences and stuff like that. So while we don't encourage people to let someone beat up their child, there's different very case by case situations where you'd work around that with a family who won't go to the guards, who won't go down that route for lots of different personal reasons, which I'm sure you can imagine. So it's clever that dealers do go to parents, because they're going to get it quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids that we see getting into serious trouble with their drug debts, not just kids, there can be grown men and women whose parents are paying off their debts as well, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But the intimidation gets worse and worse and worse for those families too. So it's really, it would be, I'd say, one of the most upsetting things that you see families going through is this intimidation and this ownership that dealers can have over them, this helplessness. But there are services like us, like the guards, that will support families in those situations.
In common with some of the other agencies we have spoken to recently, the misuse of prescription drugs continues to be a problem.
With regard to prescription drugs, it's always been an issue with our, it would be quite a high number of our service users would be presenting, and again, that with that number one problematic substance, quite interestingly, wouldn't be as often as alcohol and other illicit, and then the illicit drugs would have been named as their number one. And I wish I had the statistics now to tell you, but quite often benzodiazepines are in there somewhere. The likes of Xanax, Dalmain, so D10s, or diazepam, D10s, D5s, yellows, blueies, different names for all these different things, would be a huge issue. We've found some clients who would have experienced, symptoms of anxiety before, and now that's been compounded. They're now prescribed different things who maybe never took Xanax before. I'm seeing that with younger people, and I don't mean the children, I'm talking about the younger adults. But a lot of people, and a lot of younger people, would be ordering tablets online. So while we're talking about prescription drugs, yes, some of them abuse, if you want to use that term, their own prescribed medication, or their mothers or their wives or whoever. But I'm finding a lot of younger people are ordering things online, and we don't know the legitimacy of those of the tablets. We don't know the branding as well, or maybe branded with something, but it doesn't look too legit. And that would be very concerning in regards to overdose. And again, with that polydrug use things, if they usually take whatever amount of D5s in a day, do you know what I mean, with something else, and maybe they're our older clients and things, and maybe they're smoking heroin and things as well, or even injecting heroin and things like that, and how that would affect them. But prescription drugs, it's not a new issue. It's thankfully being spoken about more. I know plenty of GPs in the area who are brilliant, and will try other avenues before prescribing benzodiazepines now, because it can be quite a messy process to get off them. What a lot of people don't understand is that dependency on benzodiazepines requires a medical detox. So it requires either you can do that out in the community with your GP or your prescribing doctor, or you can do that in-house in a residential detox. But the risks of withdrawal from benzodiazepines in particular, which are the mostly abused prescribed drugs, it can be fatal. It can cause seizures and things like that. So we would do a lot of harm reduction work within the community, within the guys accessing the drop-in and stuff like that. Our clients are brilliant at coming to us and letting us know what's around the place, services like yourselves, and we all share all that information if we are aware of different drugs, different trays, tubs, whatever, of different tablets being sold as prescription drugs. So it's the counterfeit ones that I would be very concerned about. But it's not a new trend is what I'm saying, but it's more visible. People are talking about it, which is brilliant. And people seem to really watch out for the counterfeit ones. I think the buying online, young people are getting more educated about the risks of that. We would be very open about the risks of that, like yourselves as well. So just that education, that we're all just keeping conversations going on with GPs and things as well. So if we're working on a care plan with a GP where someone is misusing their prescription, if that client, and I'm not talking about under 18s here, but I'm talking about adults, if that client has signed a consent to share information, that would be shared in a very supportive way with the client as well, or it would be part of their care plan, of how to kind of manage and maintain the prescribed dose, or to get off them completely with the GP's support. There's some really, really great GPs in Bray that are really looking at therapies, looking at alternative options, different SSRIs and things like that, rather than prescribing the likes of Xanax and these kind of more sedative drugs.
Although BCAT is operating in these currently challenging times, Riadhna is generally encouraged by the cross-agency cooperation that exists in Bray.
With regard to the services in Bray for drug and alcohol use and for families affected and friends affected and the community being affected, we have a wealth of services. We could do it more funding, but I think when the services work well together, it's brilliant. And I don't think we're ever going to be at a point where there is one service in one place. You know what I mean? So I think the importance is that interagency piece, and that everybody works collaboratively. And when that does work well, it's priceless. It's about everybody, like you guys are doing now, everybody getting to know each other, everybody getting to know who is where. Bray is brilliant. I've worked in a lot of other communities, Tala, out in town and stuff as well, in lots of different services. But I think Bray, you know, with say the Drugs Awareness Forum, the community conference, the things like that, I think the networking opportunities are fantastic. I just think we could all get better with following through with what we say we're going to do after we leave, be it the Royal or wherever we are. You know, to follow through on that, to keep meeting up and things like that, and to keep referring, because the most important thing I find in my role is, if I am not the person to be dealing with what this client is presenting, be humble enough in yourself to know that and to refer on and to access the services that are there, you know, and that's their job. None of us can do it all. We can't. And we shouldn't have to either. So about leaning on each other. And I think you know, between you know, if we're going to talk about the drug services, for adults and things, you know, between Daesh and ourselves, we would absolutely share workload, you know, between the youth stuff, like say with dual diagnosis is so huge with the young people, ourselves, Lucina, Anne and stuff would work closely and stuff like that. We speak so highly. Most of the young people that we do engage with a lot of the time already know of youth services, and that's incredible. I find the youth services in Bray, you don't see that everywhere as well. And how well known they are. You know, it can be really hard to access youth services in other places if you're not from that exact estate or whatever it is, whereas this is such a big area that you all cover between yourselves and Connect and Fassaro and all. So I just think if everyone is working as well as I know everybody can, do you know what I mean? That it's crucial. I did my thesis recently on dual diagnosis and interagency working, and the way we're all structured, it's the only way I believe. Unless they're funded totally different and it's done from a department stance in the government, state level, we all need to learn how to work better together. And I think we do a good job of it. I just think we could do a better job of it in Bray to provide the proper services that these people deserve, do you know?
The Bray Community Addiction Team can be contacted through their website at bcat.ie or by telephone on 01 276 4692. We'd like to thank Riadhna Holahan for her participation in this podcast series. This episode was produced by Danielle O'Brien at Bray Youth Service for the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum.
This is a podcast from the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum.